This is the story about the travels of two men called Dave. This is Dave Early, and the guy riding ahead of him is GT rider Dave Unkovic. They share two common passions, a love of Thailand, their adopted country, and a love of travel and adventure on large, powerful motorbikes. The two Daves are on the first leg of a Golden Triangle Loop, one of the great bike rides of the world, starting in Chiang Mai and making its way via Mae Salong, Third Thai, Mae Sai, and back to Chiang Mai. A journey that can take about 4 solid days, or as long as you like. The journey takes you past some spectacular natural attractions, as well as amazing man-made wonders and historical sites, such as this one, Chedi Khao, the Crystal Pagoda in Wat Tat Ton.
Having dinner one night in Chiang Mai, I met a gentleman who was traveling around the world on his motorcycle, and he had come from Papua New Guinea to Chiang Mai. And he told me, well, if you like motorcycles, he says, there's a guy here you should meet. His name's David Unkovic, and he's usually at the cafe restaurant, and we're going on a ride together in a couple days. You can probably find him there. So I did. I went in and found David sitting there reading a newspaper, and I introduced myself, and I says, well, I understand you're going for a ride in a couple of days. Could I come along? And David just kind of looked up and said, yeah, no worries, mate. Suit yourself. And I said, well, I need to rent a motorcycle. He says, well, you can rent one across the street over there. So I did, and that was our first ride together. And over the last 10 years, I think we've clocked up thousands of kilometers riding together. And motorcycling now has become just a way of life here for me, I think. Basically, the adventure motorcycling and the traveling and the things you can see in Thailand is what's kept me here this long.
Oh, it always feels good to be here on the mountains. On the backside here is the Burmese border up there. You've got army bunkers up there. You feel as if you're coming to somewhere remote here. Many years ago, there was a bit of a battle of Khun Sa. They lobbed a couple of grenades or bombs shells into the river here. And there's a bit of a dispute going on.
The dispute actually started back in 1969 when Khun Sa emerged from the jungles of Burma to become the most notorious drug lord in Southeast Asia. The Daves were keen to find out more about him, so at the village of Ban Ter Thai, they travelled up a winding mountain road to the fascinating Khun Sa Museum. This was actually the drug lord's old fortress, a structure he had the audacity to set up on Thai soil.
Right, so what we've got here, this is the old camp and headquarters of Khun Sa. Up here is a statue to Khun Sa they built after he died. And then over here is his camp and headquarters where he used to live over here. And there's a mess room and everything in here. Over the other side, over here, is a kitchen and there's a stable where they had the horses there.
Believe it or not, this man was once Khun Sa's public relations officer. He told the Daves that the people around here think his old boss was a great guy because he built this village, including the hospital and the school. He was certainly a colourful character with some interesting ideas, to say the least. For example, in 1988 he offered to sell his entire opium crop to the Australian government for $50 million a year over a period of 8 years, which would have virtually stopped the heroin trade into both Australia and the United States overnight. But the government rejected his offer, saying that the Australian government does not pay criminals to refrain from criminal activity. Undeterred by this rejection, he made a similar offer to the Americans, who responded by enlisting the aid of the Thai armed forces and launching an offensive against his base.
Oh, this was like a hidden empire there in the late 70s and 80s when Khun Sa first moved in here, and there was no Thai government forces in here at all. And this was their own little kingdom they had to themselves, so they weren't bothered by anyone. And then in the late 80s, with pressure from the Americans, they attacked to force him out.
Today, things are fairly quiet in the hills of the Golden Triangle, although it wasn't always like this. Mesa Long has a fairly turbulent past.
When the nationalist Chinese or Chiang Kai-shek soldiers lost their battle with the communists in China, they fled first into Burma, then into North Thailand and settled here. To raise money in those days, it was famous for its opium growing, and in the 70s it was known as the heroin capital of the world.
The Daves then took a picturesque ride along the mountaintops of Mesa Long, where they stopped off for some light refreshment at the sweet Mesa Long, run by Ton and his wife Jinapuk. They used to live in Australia, but decided to return to the mountains of Thailand to pursue a different dream.
I studied photography in Melbourne for 2.5 years, and I graduated bachelor degree in Bangkok about advertising.
These days, Ton's photographic efforts are confined to snapshots of his pet dogs and children, and he's kept pretty busy creating gastronomic masterpieces such as genuine English Devonshire teas. And there was another surprise in store. Dave Unkovich's old mate Richard and his wife had dropped by. Over more scones, jam and cream, the riders swapped tales of their latest adventures.
You don't feel threatened at all when you're riding here in the mountains alone?
Never. I've never had anything other than respect, and because we're mature men, their culture is to treat us well and respect us. And I bought this from the veterans in Chiang Kong, and when the military people, I pull up at a checkpoint and they see it, it's Anzac Day type thing, and they straight through, sir. Sometimes I don't have a guidebook at all, and I just rely on your map and the GPS, which is a new thing for me. Before I just used to, aim north and see what happened.
Okay, see you, mate.
If you've enjoyed this story and would like to share more of Dave's adventures, visit this website and keep watching.